Every ticket hides a life. He asked 3 questions, and the internet remembered what justice sounds like. Something cracked the day people stopped expecting kindness from their government. They stopped looking for empathy in institutions meant to serve them. They entered courtrooms not for justice, but for judgment. They rehearsed apologies to clerks who'd already stopped listening. They braced for fines, not fairness. They accepted that being processed was easier than being heard. And then, Providence happened. Because one man, Judge Frank Caprio, decided the law didn't need to sound cold to stay strong. In a small municipal courtroom, he rewrote what justice could look like. Not with new legislation, not with speeches, but with questions. Simple ones. What happened that day? How are you managing? What's really going on in your life right now? And suddenly, people answered. Not with excuses, but with honesty. Because for once, someone in power actually wanted to listen. The internet noticed. Millions watched as a grandmother wept when her ticket was forgiven. A veteran stood a little taller when the judge thanked him for his service. A young mother left with her dignity intact instead of another bill she couldn't pay. This wasn't a show. It was a standard. A demonstration that compassion doesn't weaken justice. It perfects it. Judge Caprio didn't erase consequences. He refined them. He showed that real justice requires discipline, the courage to pause, to think, to ask, will this punishment bring balance or just more pain? Case by case, year by year, a quiet revolution unfolded in Providence. The message was simple but radical. You can enforce the rules without breaking the people. You can uphold the law and still honor the struggle. You can serve justice and still serve humanity. You can enforce the rules without breaking the people. You can uphold the law and still honor the struggle. You can serve justice and still serve humanity.
Be both firm and kind, both serious and warm. Authority doesn't require cruelty to function. It actually works better without it. His courtroom became a masterclass in what institutions could be if they remembered their purpose. Every traffic violation hides a context. The single mother late to pick up her kids because her shift ran over, and the daycare charges by the minute. The elderly man who missed the new sign because his vision isn't what it was. The young father who parked illegally because his baby was choking and the emergency room was right there. The law sees infractions. Judge Caprio saw circumstances, and he made a choice every time. Punish the act or address the situation. Collect the revenue or invest in trust. Humiliate the vulnerable or strengthen the community. He chose the harder path, the one that required discernment, the one that couldn't be automated or scripted, the one that treated each person as irreplaceable. People called him the nicest judge, but nice is too soft a word for what he practiced. Rigor lived in his kindness. Standards shaped his mercy. He dismissed tickets when dismissal was just. He reduced fines when reduction fit the facts. And he upheld penalties when responsibility demanded it. He never pretended parking laws don't matter. He never suggested rules are optional. He simply insisted that enforcement could be humane. The law, he showed us, bends without breaking. Justice stretches to fit the truth. And power, wielded with conscience, becomes something people respect instead of fear. His legacy isn't softness, it's precision, the precise calibration of consequence to circumstance, the exact measure of mercy earned by honesty, the careful balance between order and compassion. And millions of people watching from around the world learn something they'd stopped believing. Institutions can care.
Authority can listen. Justice can feel like justice. If this moved you, tell us where you're watching from and subscribe to Case Closed for more true stories of compassion. The revolution wasn't in the verdicts. It was in the premise that every person who stands before the law deserves to be seen fully. That context doesn't excuse, but it does matter. That society functions better when its systems remember they serve human beings, not case numbers. Judge Caprio proved it daily, one parking ticket at a time, one scared defendant at a time, one moment of genuine attention at a time. Fees fund cities. Lives sustain them. The 96-year-old driver. The elderly man shuffled to the stand, his son beside him, and the charge seems straightforward enough at first glance. A parking violation, expired meter, the kind of ticket Providence writes dozens of times each day. Then Judge Caprio asked the question that changed everything. Where were you headed that morning? The son answered. His father, 96 years old, had driven him to the hospital for blood work. The cancer treatments demanded regular monitoring. His father insisted on being the one behind the wheel, wouldn't hear otherwise. He wants to take care of me, the son said quietly. He's been doing it his whole life. He's not stopping now. The courtroom held its breath. Here stood duty in its oldest form. A father who'd raised a child, fed a family, worked his years, and now refused to surrender the one thing he could still offer. Presence, the ability to drive his sick son to the appointment, to sit in the waiting room, to be the father one more time. Age had taken almost everything else: strength, speed, the easy confidence of youth. But it hadn't taken love. Had gotten him a parking ticket while he sat beside his son in a hospital corridor, waiting for test results that would tell them if the cancer was winning or losing this month. Judge Caprio studied the paperwork. The meter had expired. No dispute there. The law was clear. The fine was standard. And the judge spoke, "Your father is taking care of you. That's what fathers do." His voice carried weight and warmth in equal measure. "And you're here together. That's what matters." He dismissed the ticket, but he didn't just wave it away. He honored it. He acknowledged the violation, explained the usual consequence, and then made the calculation that compassion demanded. This man had given Providence 96 years of life, paid his taxes, raised his family, served his community. Now he was serving his son through illness, driving to medical appointments, because that's what you do when someone you love is fighting for their life. The city could absorb this loss. The family couldn't absorb another fine. The son's eyes filled. His father nodded once. That generation's version of profound gratitude. They left together, the old man's hand on his son's shoulder, steady despite the years. The internet exploded with emotion. Comments poured in from adult children who recognized their own parents in that frail determination. From aging parents who understood the fierce need to keep contributing. From families navigating illness who knew exactly what blood work appointments mean and how they disrupt every routine, including where you park and for how long. Duty doesn't pause for parking enforcement. Cancer doesn't care about expired meters. Judge Caprio understood something essential. The law serves life, not the other way around. When enforcement conflicts with human decency, you adjust the enforcement. You don't demand that a 96-year-old father, accompanying his ill son to critical medical tests, also remember to feed a meter every 2 hours. That's not justice. That's bureaucracy eating its own purpose. The case illustrated his method.
He gathered facts, he weighed equities, he considered what the city needed versus what the family could bear, he measured the violation against the circumstance, and he chose the outcome that served both order and mercy. Safety remained paramount. Had the father been driving recklessly, endangering others, the outcome would have been different. Had he parked blocking emergency access, the ticket would have stood. But he'd parked legally in a metered spot, then stayed longer than expected because hospitals don't run on schedule and illness doesn't care about your parking quarters. The distinction mattered. Judge Caprio never abandoned standards. He clarified them. Does the rule protect people or just extract money? Does this fine teach responsibility or punish unavoidable hardship? Will this penalty make the streets safer or just make a struggling family broker? He asked those questions every time. And when the answers pointed toward mercy, he delivered it without hesitation. The 96-year-old driver became a symbol not of special treatment, but of measured enforcement, of institutions that remember they exist to serve communities, not to financially penalize every moment when life gets complicated. Tens of thousands of people shared that case. They tagged their parents, they sent it to friends going through medical crises, they saved it to show their kids what fairness looks like when it's practiced by someone with actual power. Because power is easy to abuse and rare to witness being used. Well, Judge Caprio made it look natural. Like, of course you dismiss the ticket. Like, of course you honor the father. Like, of course the law bends here. But it only looks natural after decades of practice, after thousands of cases where he chose the harder path, after years of refining the balance between rules and grace. The case took maybe 5 minutes. The lesson lasted lifetimes. The grieving mother. She stood before him, carrying layers of disaster, each one compounding the last. And when she spoke, her voice shook with the effort of not breaking completely. Her son had died, not long ago. The grief was fresh and consuming. And while she was drowning in that loss, trying to breathe through each day, the tickets had accumulated. Parking violations during hospital visits and funeral arrangements. She'd missed court dates because she'd missed everything that month. Lost in the fog that descends when you bury your child. Now she faced eviction. Her benefits had gotten tangled in bureaucracy. She was one emergency away from homelessness, and the city of Providence wanted its parking fines paid. Judge Caprio listened to all of it, every detail, every stressor. He didn't rush her, didn't interrupt. Let her tell the whole terrible story of how a mother survives the unsurvivable and still gets parking tickets. The law had no exemption for grief. The parking enforcement officers who'd written the citations didn't know her son had died. The automated notices didn't care about funeral dates or benefit appeals. The system processed her like it processed everyone. Infraction, notice, penalty, collection. And here she stood, in front of a judge who had to decide if the system should keep processing her, or if a human being should intervene. He asked about her son, what had happened, how she was managing, whether she had support. Simple questions that acknowledged she'd lost a child, not just accumulated tickets. She answered through tears, and the courtroom understood.
Caprio had understood immediately. This woman wasn't defying the law. She was surviving catastrophe. There's a calculation courts make constantly, usually without stating it. City interest versus human reality. Revenue versus compassion. The law's demand versus the defendant's capacity. Judge Caprio made that calculation out loud. The tickets were legitimate. She had parked illegally, but she'd parked illegally while navigating her son's medical crisis and death, while arranging a funeral, while fighting to keep her housing and benefits intact during the worst period of her life. Should Providence add financial penalties to that burden? Would those fines serve any purpose except to push a grieving mother closer to the edge? He dismissed the tickets, all of them. But he did more than that. He spoke to her with a kind of gentle firmness that treats grief as real, but doesn't let it become identity. He acknowledged her loss. He expressed genuine sorrow for what she was enduring. And he offered hope that she would find her footing again, that the fog would lift, that life would become bearable. "You're going to get through this," he told her. Not a promise he could guarantee, but a blessing he could offer. A reminder from someone in authority that she deserved to survive this. If you believe kindness belongs in courtrooms, tap like and share this with someone who needs hope today. The case revealed something essential about Judge Caprio's philosophy. Compassion doesn't mean ignoring consequences. It means weighing them accurately. It means asking, what does justice require here? What does proportionality demand? What outcome serves both the law and the person standing before it? Grief is expensive. It costs you attention, energy, routine, stability. You miss things. You forget appointments. You park wherever you can when your mind is shattered. And
Your child is dying or dead. A functioning society understands this. It builds flex into its systems for when people break under unbearable weight. It doesn't compound tragedy with bureaucratic punishment. Judge Caprio built that flex into his courtroom, case by case, person by person, story by story. The grieving mother left without fines she couldn't pay. She left with dignity intact. She left knowing that someone with power had listened to her, believed her, and chosen mercy. And millions watching learned that courts can be places of healing, not just judgment. That justice can absorb grief without abandoning standards. That the law is strong enough to bend when bending is right. Studies show that financial penalties hit hardest during crisis, that fines escalate family instability, that debt compounds trauma. The research is clear. Punishing people who are already struggling often just ensures they never recover. Judge Caprio didn't need studies. He needed to listen. This woman wasn't a scofflaw. She wasn't gaming the system. She was a mother whose son had died trying to survive the aftermath. While the city sent her tickets for parking violations she'd committed while planning his funeral, the city would survive forgiving those tickets. She might not survive paying them. So, he forgave them. The choice was that simple and that profound. Institutions exist to serve communities. When enforcement damages the community more than the violation did, you adjust the enforcement. The grieving mother became another viral moment, another case where people saw what justice could look like when practiced by someone who remembered its purpose. She'd been seen. Her pain had been honored. Her humanity had been protected. And the law had functioned exactly as it should. Firmly, but fairly. Seriously, but compassionately. Maintaining order without inflicting unnecessary suffering. That's not
Soft justice. That's sophisticated justice. The kind that requires wisdom, discernment, and moral courage. The kind that refuses to hide behind rules when rules fail the truth. Judge Caprio practiced it daily, and the world watched, learning what they'd forgotten. The law can protect dignity while enforcing standards. Justice can be both strong and kind. Power can be wielded with conscience. The homeless man and the Philomena Fund. He'd been sleeping in his car, not by choice, but by circumstance. Housing had collapsed, income had vanished, and when you have no address, no stability, no cushion between you and the street, you make do. You find a spot, you park, you try to sleep, you wake up and do it again. Providence towed his car, slapped him with a boot fee. Now he stood before Judge Caprio, homeless
and effectively immobilized. Without his car, he had no shelter. Without shelter, he had no chance of climbing back to stability. The debt was legitimate. The city had rules about where you could park overnight. He'd violated them. The fees were standard. The system was working exactly as designed, and the system was destroying a man who was already destroyed. Judge Caprio listened to the story. The job loss, the housing loss, the slow cascade from stability into crisis. The nights in the car trying to stay safe and warm. The morning the tow truck came. The defendant wasn't making excuses. He owned the violation. He just had no way to pay the fee. No family to call, no credit to tap, no resources left. Before and after. Before the tow, he had a car and could job hunt, stay mobile, survive. After the boot, he had nothing and no way to recover it. Judge Caprio introduced the Philomena Fund, named
After his mother. The fund operated on a simple premise: community compassion channeled through lawful structure. People could donate. The court could apply those funds to cases where mercy served justice better than collection. This was one of those cases. The judge explained it clearly. The city's interest in keeping streets orderly was real, but its interest in helping residents recover from crisis was also real. And when you had a man who'd lost his housing, was living in his car, and needed that car to reestablish stability, punishing him with fees he couldn't pay accomplished nothing except ensuring he stayed homeless. The Philomena Fund would cover the boot removal. The man could reclaim his car. He could resume job hunting. He could sleep somewhere mobile and safe instead of on the street. The defendant stood very still, absorbing this. Then he thanked the judge, voice rough, and asked how he could pay it back someday. Judge Caprio smiled. You pay it forward. The case illustrated a principle that ran through all his work. Mercy requires structure. Compassion without accountability becomes enabling, but accountability without compassion becomes cruelty. The Philomena Fund provided structure. It wasn't free money. It wasn't erasing consequences. It was a community deciding that helping struggling residents recover served everyone better than grinding them deeper into crisis. And it was funded by choice. Viewers donated. Community members contributed. The fund grew because people believed in what it represented. A safety net woven into the justice system. A way to catch people before they fell completely through. Judge Caprio never suggested the man deserved to park illegally, never implied the rules didn't matter. He simply insisted that enforcement could be intelligent, that you could uphold parking laws while recognizing that sometimes a boot on a homeless man's car
just creates more homelessness. The man left with his car. He left with a chance. He left knowing that someone had intervened at exactly the moment when intervention could still make a difference. And the world learned that justice can be both firm and flexible, that courts can maintain standards while recognizing that sometimes mercy is the most productive outcome. Responsibility remained. The man still had to find work, secure housing, rebuild stability. The system still had to enforce parking regulations, but the balance had shifted just enough to give him a fighting chance instead of guaranteeing his failure. Humiliation is not justice. It's just additional suffering dressed up as enforcement. Judge Caprio refused to confuse the two. He could hold people accountable without destroying them. He could enforce rules without stripping dignity. He could represent the city's interests while protecting its most vulnerable residents. The Philomena Fund became famous. Donations poured in. The model got copied. Other communities started asking, could we do this? Could we build compassion into our enforcement systems? Could we give judges tools beyond fines and penalties? The answer was yes, they could. Judge Caprio proved it worked, but it required judges willing to see past the case file, willing to hear the full story, willing to weigh outcomes beyond simple collection rates, willing to remember that justice serves people, not just processes. The homeless man's case got millions of views. Comments flooded in from people who'd been homeless, who'd slept in cars, who understood exactly how one towed vehicle could be the difference between survival and catastrophe. They saw themselves. They saw their neighbors. They saw their own city's enforcement systems and wondered why their courts didn't function like this one. Because Judge Caprio made it look obvious. Of course you help
The homeless man recover his car. Of course you remove barriers when removing them serves everyone. Of course you choose the outcome that strengthens the community instead of just punishing its weakest members. But it's only obvious after someone shows you, after someone practices it publicly, after someone demonstrates that power can be used to lift people instead of just processing them. The man drove away, not toward guaranteed success, but toward possibility. That's all mercy can offer most times. A chance, an opening, a moment when the weight lifts just enough to let you breathe and try again. Judge Caprio gave those moments freely. The city was stronger for it. The refugee family and the child translator. The parents spoke limited English. Their daughter, maybe 10 years old, stood between them translating, her voice careful and clear. They'd been ticketed for a school zone violation. The family was new to Providence, new to America, still learning how everything worked. Judge Caprio watched the child translate his questions to her parents and their answers back to him. The dynamic was delicate. The parents were trying to respect the court, the child was trying to help them understand and be understood. And the violation itself was minor, but clear. They'd driven faster than allowed in a school zone. Safety matters in school zones. The rules exist to protect children, exactly like the one standing before him translating. Judge Caprio never dismissed that, but he also understood context. This family was navigating a new country, new roads, new signs, new rules. They weren't defying school zone laws, they were learning them. He spoke to the parents through their daughter, asked how long they'd been in Providence, where they'd come from, how the transition was going. Simple questions that acknowledged the enormity
Of what they were doing. Rebuilding a life in a foreign country. The parents answered honestly. They'd misunderstood the zone. They hadn't seen the sign in time. They were sorry. They would be more careful. Judge Caprio explained why school zones have stricter limits, why the rules protect children, why drivers need to slow down in those areas. He used the teaching moment, making sure the parents understood through their daughter's careful translation. Then, he reduced the fine significantly, not because the violation didn't matter, but because the family was clearly learning, clearly trying, clearly committed to following the rules once they understood them. Learning deserves encouragement, not maximum penalties. The parents nodded, grateful. The daughter translated their thanks. The family left together, the child's hand in her mother's, having learned that this new country's courts could be places of understanding, not just punishment. Empathy is public safety. When communities feel understood by their institutions, they engage with them. When people encounter compassion in courts, they respect the law more, not less. Judge Caprio knew this instinctively. He didn't separate justice from community building. Every case was an opportunity to strengthen the relationship between Providence and its residents. The refugee family needed to learn the rules, but they also needed to learn they could trust the system that enforced those rules. The judges would listen. that honesty would be honored, that mistakes made while learning wouldn't be punished as harshly as deliberate violations. The reduced fine accomplished both goals. It held them accountable. It taught the lesson, and it welcomed them into the community with grace. The case went viral in immigrant communities. People shared it across language barriers. It became a signal. Providence is a place that understands transition, that honors effort, that distinguishes between defiance and confusion.
Judge Cabrio never made policy pronouncements about immigration. He just practiced what inclusion looks like in a courtroom. Case by case, family by family, one child translator at a time. The law can function in any language when it's administered with patience. Rules can be taught instead of just enforced. And justice can serve integration without abandoning safety standards. The schools on violation mattered. Kids needed protection. Speed limits needed enforcement. But the enforcement could be educational instead of punitive when the context warranted it. That's sophisticated justice. Justice that achieves its goals. Safety, order, compliance, while building trust instead of fear. The family would drive more carefully through school zones. Now, not because they'd been financially devastated, but because someone had taken time to explain why it mattered, had trusted their good faith, and had shown them that this new home valued both rules and people. The kids judged their parents. Some days he let children sit on the bench, handed them the gavel, metaphorically at least, let them deliver the verdict on their parents' parking tickets. The moment was playful but purposeful. A child asked the parent, guilty or not guilty? And the parent, usually with a sheepish smile, had to answer to their kid. One boy took it seriously, asked his father straight, guilty or not guilty? The father, trying not to laugh, admitted guilt. The boy nodded like he'd expected nothing less. Judge Caprio dismissed the ticket, but the lesson landed. Your kids are watching how you handle responsibility. Another child, bolder, told her mother she should probably pay the fine. The mother agreed, laughing. Judge Caprio reduced it instead, but the teaching moment was made. Rules matter. Accountability matters. Even kids understand fairness. The exchanges were brief and light, but they carried weight. They showed families that courts didn't have to be traumatic spaces, that justice could include humor without losing seriousness, that teaching responsibility could happen through play. Judge Caprio understood something essential about community institutions. They should be accessible, demystified, human. Courts that terrify citizens create distance between people and justice. Courts that welcome citizens, even young ones, build connection. The kids, as judges, moments broke tension without breaking respect. They reminded parents that their behavior modeled lessons for their children. They reminded children that rules exist and matter. And they reminded everyone watching that justice doesn't require severity to be effective. One sentence, 5 words, truth lands harder with a smile. The playful cases became some of the most shared content. Parents showed them to their kids. Teachers used them in classrooms. Communities recognized something they'd forgotten. Justice can be serious without being harsh, firm without being cruel, educational without being painful. Judge Caprio never undermined the law during these moments. He simply showed that enforcement could be humanized, that courts could engage families without frightening them, that you could teach respect for rules while also showing that the people enforcing rules respect you back. The children left understanding something important. Courts exist to help communities function fairly. Judges are people making decisions, not machines processing cases. And when you make a mistake, owning it with honesty gets you further than excuses. Those lessons stuck. Parents reported their kids reminding them to feed parking meters. Teachers shared stories of students referencing Judge Caprio when discussing fairness. The ripples spread far beyond the courtroom.
Because the cases were entertaining, they traveled. Because they were wise, they taught. Because they honored both rules and humanity, they changed minds about what justice could be. Judge Caprio built goodwill one smile at a time.
Child-delivered verdict at a time. One moment of playful accountability at a time. And the goodwill translated into respect for the entire system. When people trust courts, they comply with rulings. When they fear courts, they avoid and resent them. Judge Caprio chose trust. Every day, every case, even the funny ones. The confusing turn and clear reasoning. The defendant had turned right on red. The ticket claimed it was illegal. She insisted the sign was confusing. Multiple signs at the same intersection, different rules depending on which lane. Easy to misread when you're driving, watching traffic, trying to be safe. Judge Caprio examined the evidence, looked at the photos of the intersection, read the ticket officer's notes, asked the defendant to explain exactly what she saw and why she turned. She walked him through it. The red light, the sign that said no turn on red but seemed to apply to the left lane, the clear right lane, the decision to turn, believing she was following the rules. Judge Caprio considered. He could see how the intersection would confuse someone unfamiliar with it. The signage wasn't clear enough. The rules weren't obviously posted. A reasonable driver could misread it. Confusion is not defiance, he explained, his reasoning out loud. When traffic laws confuse reasonable people, that's a design problem, not a driver problem. When signs don't clearly communicate rules, enforcement becomes unfair. The city's job is to make rules clear. When clarity fails, tickets fail. He dismissed the citation. Then he noted for the record that the intersection needed better signage, that confused drivers are dangerous drivers, that Providence should fix the design, not just ticket people who can't figure it out quickly enough. The defendant thanked him, relieved, but the lesson extended far beyond her case. Institutions own their clarity failures. When rules are complicated or poorly explained, enforcing them strictly punishes people for institutional failures. That's not justice. That's bureaucracy protecting itself. Instead of serving citizens, Judge Caprio refused to let enforcement hide bad design. He held the city accountable for creating confusion. He pushed back against tickets that resulted from poor signage rather than deliberate violation. And he articulated the principle clearly. Fairness requires clarity. If you want people to follow rules, make the rules followable. Make them visible, understandable, accessible. Then enforce them. But don't ticket people for failing to decode confusing intersections while driving. The case went viral among drivers who'd been frustrated by similar situations. Confusing road designs, unclear signs, tickets that felt like traps instead of enforcement. They saw someone in authority say what they'd always felt. The system should be clear, and when it's not, that's not the driver's fault. Judge Caprio's reasoning was precise. He didn't just waive tickets arbitrarily. He diagnosed where responsibility actually lay, sometimes with the driver, sometimes with the city, and he adjusted outcomes accordingly. The turn on red case became a model for fair traffic enforcement. Clear rules, clearly posted, fairly enforced. Ambiguity resolved in favor of the confused driver. Design problems fixed rather than profited from. That's governance that respects citizens, that builds trust, that makes people want to comply because they believe the system is legitimate. Across thousands of cases, patterns emerged. Not scripts, but principles. Not formulas, but wisdom. Judge Caprio heard the story first, always. Before ruling, before deciding, he listened. He asked questions. He gathered context. He gave people space to explain their circumstances without interrupting or dismissing them. Listening was the foundation.
You can't judge fairly what you haven't understood fully. Then he weighed equities. Cities' interests mattered. Order, safety, revenue, compliance, all legitimate needs. But the defendant's reality mattered too. Their capacity to pay, their intent, their circumstances, their humanity. Justice lived in the balance, not in automatic enforcement or automatic dismissal, but in the careful calibration of consequence to context. Finally, he chose the humane, lawful path. Not the easiest path, not the path that would generate revenue or satisfy critics. He chose the path that served both law and mercy, the path that upheld standards while honoring struggle. Dignity plus compassion plus accountability equals trust in institutions. People trusted Judge Caprio because he practiced what he preached, because his mercy was disciplined, because his compassion was grounded in principle, because he never abandoned responsibility in pursuit of popularity. He dismissed tickets when dismissal was just. He reduced fines when reduction fit the facts. He upheld penalties when the violation and the circumstances warranted it, and he explained his reasoning every time, modeling the thought process that led to each decision. Transparency built legitimacy. People might not always agree with his rulings, but they understood how he reached them. They saw the work of balancing. They witnessed the care he took. They recognized that he was trying to be fair, not just lenient. Tell us the moment that changed your mind about justice, and subscribe to Case Closed for daily moral stories. The legacy thread wasn't about individual cases. It was about repeatable principles. Any judge could practice this. Any court could function this way. You don't need exceptional charisma or viral videos. You need commitment to a few core ideas. Listen completely, weigh honestly, choose humanely. Those principles work in traffic court and beyond, in schools, in social services, in any institution that wields power over people's lives. Judge Caprio proved that compassion scales, that mercy can be systematic without being automatic, that you can build institutions that honor both standards and people. Mercy is policy. You can measure it in trust metrics, in compliance rates, in community relationships, in how many people after encountering the justice system feel it treated them fairly. By those measures, Judge Caprio's courtrooms succeeded dramatically. People left feeling heard. Families left with dignity intact. Communities learned that courts could be places of understanding, not just punishment. And the model spread. Other judges watched. Other courts reformed. Other communities asked, could we do this? Could our institutions function with this much humanity? The answer was always yes. But it required will, required courage, required judges willing to think beyond collection rates and case quotas, willing to invest time in understanding stories, willing to make decisions that served long-term community health over short-term revenue. Judge Caprio made those choices look natural. Like, of course you listen. Like, of course you weigh context. Like, of course you choose mercy when mercy serves justice better than punishment. But natural is earned. After decades of practice, after thousands of cases, after years of refining the balance between firmness and flexibility, his courtroom was a laboratory. Every case an experiment in what justice could be when practiced by someone who remembered its purpose. Not to punish automatically, not to process sufficiently, but to serve the community by upholding order fairly, compassionately, sustainably. The experiment succeeded. The model worked. And millions of people learned that institutions can be different, can be better, can function with conscience. The threads wove together into a tapestry. Listen. Weigh. Choose wisely. Honor dignity.
Enforce fairly. Build trust. Repeat. Simple principles. Profound impact.
The courtroom in Providence became a classroom for the world. People watched from every continent, from countries where courts are feared, from communities where justice feels foreign. They watched and learned that another way exists. They learned patience. Judge Caprio never rushed, never processed people like case numbers, gave every defendant time to speak, explain, be understood. They learned humor. Justice can smile, can acknowledge absurdity, can connect with people through warmth without losing seriousness. They learned fairness, real fairness, not equal treatment, but equitable treatment, calibrated to circumstances, adjusted for context, responsive to truth. They learned courage. It takes courage to defy the pressure to maximize collection rates, to resist the efficiency demands that turn courts into assembly lines, to insist that every person deserves individual attention. He did it every day, quietly, without a spotlight, no speeches, no grandstanding, just the steady work of justice done the right way. And people changed because they saw it. Parents taught their kids fairness with his cases. Teachers built lessons around his questions. Courtrooms in other cities adjusted their practices. What started in Providence traveled past Rhode Island, past America, because the principle was universal. Power can be humane. Judge Frank Caprio was never soft. He held people accountable, expected honesty, required responsibility, imposed consequences when they fit. But he did it with dignity, with the clear-eyed understanding that everyone who stood before him was someone's mother, father, child, neighbor, someone carrying a story. The celebration isn't about perfection. He'd be the first to admit balance is hard and the scales need constant recalibration. The celebration is about commitment, showing up, listening fully, weighing fairly, choosing humanely, again tomorrow, and the day after that. That's the legacy. Compassion as disciplined justice, mercy with structure, consequence calibrated to circumstance, a model any institution can follow if it remembers who it serves. And the ripples continue. Every time a judge pauses to ask one question.
One more question. Every time a clerk treats someone like a person, every time a fine is measured against real life instead of an abstract rule. Because justice is strongest when it remembers the human being in front of it. Before you go, tell us where you're watching from. If you believe courts can be firm and fair, subscribe to Case Closed. Here, we keep Judge Caprio's legacy alive, story by story, choice by choice, proving that justice still has a heartbeat.